On this episode of What the Ship, we're going to look at not the top 5, but the top 10 stories as of February 20th, 2025. Hi, I'm your host, Sal Mercogliano. Welcome to today's episode. So normally we do a What the Ship 5 stories, but there is too much ship happening around the world. I was going to try to do some episodes here, but I am going to be up to my neck in doing episodes if I do one at a time here. So we're going to jam everything together in one massively supersized What the Ship, 10 stories. Going to try to keep it manageable, but there is just so much going on, we need to go ahead and tackle it. If you're new to the channel, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos as they come out. Story number 1 deals with a series of potential attacks against ships involved in the trade of Russian cargo. Did a video the other day here on the motor vessel Sea Jewel being attacked in Savona, but we went back through a series of attacks against ships. So this story takes us over to G Captain. Italian prosecutors open terrorism probe into the oil tanker explosion. So Italian authorities, because of the attack on the Sea Jewel, they believe to be an attack, they are going to investigate. Remember, this ship was discovered to have some holes punctured in the side of the vessel, but did not penetrate the double hull. This goes back with a series of issues that have been happening with the Russians we talked about in that video. This is the Ursa Major. This was the cargo ship that was carrying equipment to Vladivostok that suffered a series of explosions, we believe, down in the engine room that eventually led to the loss of the ship and 2 of the crew members. Sam Chambers over at Splash 24/7 has this story. Series of tanker explosions around the Med add to European shipping security concerns. Obviously, if somebody is attacking ships, this is going to heighten security issues in and around ports, especially because such attacks could lead to massive environmental damage to coastal areas. Over at Lloyd's list, Sea Jewel incident, quote, looks like pattern of deliberate action, unquote, says the underwriters. Institute clauses cover loss of damage to vessels from terrorism or black ops, but onus of proof is on owners. So the real big question here is, how are these ships being damaged? And if they are subject to terrorism attacks, there has to be an onus of proof. We've been seeing issues with this going back. You go back to Nord Stream and the attack on Nord Stream. We still have not had definitive evidence that points one way or the other who does it. A lot of finger pointing, but not any evidence. And then we have, obviously, these attacks, including the attack on the Koala up in Ust-Luga that we talked about the other day. At the same time, you're seeing the 16th round of sanctions being passed by the EU against Russian shadow vessels. These are the vessels that are carrying Russian oil and diesel. They are hauling cargo above the price cap. Remember, the G7 and the EU had instituted price caps on the carriage of such cargo, but the Russians have been able to get around it by flagging the ships in other states, by finding other insurance and setting up companies, insurance companies, to provide insurance if they are providing insurance at all. Let's not forget there's an issue here too in the Baltic with the Baltic states, Estonia, Denmark, and a few others, who are all looking to kind of raise the concern about ships sailing without insurance, and they're talking about potentially stopping vessels. And then this last story also relates to it. This one's over at Maritime Executive. The ICS is raising alarm about low-quality, sanction-busting flag states. The newly emerging flags of choice for the sanction-busting fleet include Cambodia, Eswatini, Gabon, and Guinea-Bissau. The ICS understands. Gabon is well known as a host of Russian-serving shadow fleet and has grown by leaps and bounds since the U.S. sanctions on Russian oil exports. However, it is the emergence of Eswatini, former Swaziland, that is really raising a lot of concerns because that country isn't even a member of the International Maritime Organization. Last year, authorities in the UAE banned all Eswatini flagships from their ports over safety concerns, and the IMO has designated the privately run flag administration as fraudulent. So many countries farm out their flags to companies. So, for example, Liberia and the Marshall Islands are not headquartered in Liberia and the Marshall Islands. They're in Reston, Virginia. So you can go right from Dulles Airport right to the headquarters of 2 of the largest flags in the world. And in the case of Eswatini, this is a country that is basically just farming out its flag, getting some money, but it is not agreed to abide by IMO sanctions. So Everything involving the Dark Fleet right now is a mess. It has been a mess from the very beginning. When the G7 and the EU announced these sanctions, a lot of us knew right off the bat that this was going to cause problems because we saw nations like Iran and Venezuela getting around sanctions. And when the G7, EU, and other nations put this on Russia, it was only a matter of time that we all knew that they were going to find a way to get around it. And what we're seeing here is the creation of a parallel fleet. You have the fleet that's operating under the standard kind of normal IMO rules, and then you have these ships that are transporting Russian cargo and other cargo that are operating outside the bounds, and it is creating a problem. All right, let's go ahead to our second story. Story number 2 takes us to the western coast of Newfoundland. Not Newfoundland, Newfoundland. All right, every Canadian has got to stop yelling at me. If you don't know by now that mispronunciation is my gig, then you have not been paying attention to what's going on with shipping. I butcher every name. Grew up in New York, live in North Carolina, sailed around the world. My accent is terrible. You have to come to understand that. I am not doing this intentionally. This is just the way I talk. Happy I don't say water all the time. But meanwhile, off the coast of Newfoundland, we have the story of the MSC Baltic 3 that came aground. The vessel lost propulsion, came ashore on the western coast, and a epic rescue was done by the crew of the 103 SAR Squadron of the Royal Canadian Air Force. For those of you who haven't followed that video, and let me say to my subscribers out there, thank you for going over to Matt from 103. We boomed up his subscribers, but if you want to go check this out, again, go check out this video, go check out Matt's channel. It's really fantastic. But we got a couple of stories here to talk about. Number 1, salvage teams board the grounded MSC Baltic 3 off Newfoundland as response continues. Story over. Maritime Executive has a link over to Dev Lushman and some great photos from Cedar Cove. This is the cove. Kind of hard to see, but there is MSC Baltic 3 right in the cove. Kind of a better view here as we get closer in to see. And I have to say how lucky the crew of MSC Baltic 3 was to come ashore where it did. Now, the salvage of this ship is going to be a big issue. I want to thank Ross Johnson for sending me some great images for my use here on the channel. Video here showing the vessel. So vessel, obviously hard aground. I am beginning to notice on the vessel, and I don't know if you can quite see it or not, but the after end, the right side of the vessel, does seem to be sagging quite a bit compared to the rest of the vessel. Now, granted, the bow is hard aground and up out of the water. You can see the bulbous bow there, but she is looking to have a bending motion right around the S in MSC there. And I am concerned that the vessel may be cracking and coming apart a little bit. The vessel took a lot of hard hits when it came ashore. We're not exactly sure what kind of condition the ship is in. Going to run you through some photos that Ross took. You can see here, small vessel coming alongside. There is a pilot ladder now rigged so that they can get on board the vessel. There is no power on the vessel at the time, and so that's a major issue for any sort of salvage. Here you can see video of them getting on the vessel. That bulbous bow out of the water there shows you how it is. Now, we think the vessel is fairly lightly loaded. Even though this vessel can carry about 4,500 containers, only has about 400 containers on board at the time, 4,500 TEUs. That's a 20-foot equivalent unit, 40-foot or 2 TEUs. So we believe the vessel to be very lightly loaded. It was probably going to load when it came into Corner Brook. But the ship being in that condition really shows why it was able to come ashore the way it did. Again, you have a lot of access to this cove. Fortunately, it came ashore where there's literally road access into the area. If it had been just a little further north or south, you really wouldn't have been able to access. This, I believe, is in Corner Brook, one of the ports. This is where some of the rescue teams are being sailed from and head out to the area here. Gives you an idea of the weather conditions. It just snowed here in beautiful North Carolina. We got about 2 inches of snow. I think Corner Brook probably deals with snow on a much more consistent basis. So we're going to be watching the salvage here on MSC Baltic 3. You're going to need some lift vessels or tow vessels to get her out, but the fear here is if you pull her off, you're going to be dragging it on the bottom more, that the ship could potentially break apart. So we're going to be watching that story really closely. All right, let's go ahead to our third story. Story number 3 is a sad one for me, and this is the towing out of Philadelphia of the SS United States. About 4 months ago, did a story about this, about the SS United States being scheduled to be sunk as a reef off the coast of Florida. Now, there was a lot of starts and stops to this whole evolution, but SS United States is heading out. I'm going to do a whole separate story on the SS United States because it is an epic story to discuss. But here she is heading out of Philadelphia right now. She is being towed by the Vinnick number 6. That's this tug here in the front with McAllister tugs on the side there providing some assistance. There is a ton of videos out there with regard to this. I want to highlight 2 of them for you. One, the Battleship New Jersey, which is located right there close to where SS United States is, over in Camden, New Jersey, right across from Philadelphia. Ryan Szymanski, a friend of the show, was out there filming this. So a couple of great videos, including this one showing the SS United States coming under the Walt Whitman Bridge. The other is the SS United States Conservancy, which has a YouTube channel. I'll have both of these linked in here so you can take a look at them. They've got some great videos and images that you can examine. So for those of you who don't know, SS United States was the genius and creation of William Francis Gibbs. It was really the pinnacle of U.S. shipbuilding. She was the very last ship in the U.S. Maritime Commission's massive building program that started in 1936 with the SS America. SS United States was the flagship of the U.S. Merchant Marine, flagship of United States lines. Every one of its masters came from my alma mater, the State University of New York Maritime College. But the unique thing about SS United States is it holds the blue ribbon for the fastest crossing of the Atlantic, both east and west. This is her coming out of underneath the Walt Whitman Bridge. This was one of the big factors for getting her out of Philadelphia. They had to wait for an extremely low tide to bring her out. She cleared the bridge by about 6 feet. Matter of fact, the police had to close the bridge while she was coming under it. The ship has been out of service since 1969 and has been kind of moved around at different layberths at different times. She was down in Newport News for a long time. She went to Turkey to have asbestos removed with plans for maybe putting her back into service, but she has been laid up in Philadelphia since then. And while there are hopes to rebuild the vessel and maybe turn it into a hotel, she's in very poor material condition, as you can see here. She just has the most beautiful lines of a ship, in my opinion. Those 2 massive stacks are just amazing. There are plans to remove the stacks where the ship is going to be sunk off of Florida. She's going to be sunk very close to where the USS Oriskany, an Essex-class carrier, was sunk as a reef. This is going to be the largest reef, artificial reef, ever. I am actually of the opinion that saving this vessel would have been a mistake. She's in such poor material condition that it was going to be really hard. And I just saw her just decaying and rusting away. And I think a Viking funeral for her is maybe the best thing. Now, it's going to be a long trek to get her from Philadelphia down. She's going to Mobile, Alabama, and then eventually to be sunk off of Florida. If you want to track her, head on over to Marine Traffic, and you can follow her passage. The tug that's doing the tow is the Vinnick number 6, a good buddy of mine, Mike Vinnick, who is again a graduate of the State University of New York Maritime College. It's one of his tugs that's going to be pulling the vessel along the coast. This is a difficult time to be pulling a vessel. I'm going to say this. It's February. This is not a great time to be out. They actually had to wait for some weather. There have been incidents in the past where tugs will lose tows. So we will wait and see whether or not SS United States, she's a big tow to carry. That's a lot. So she's going to be heading southbound right into the Gulf Stream. She'll head along the coast, try to get close into shore to get out of that Gulf Stream. That Gulf Stream has a lot of kick to it. And then go around the southern tip of Florida and then make for Mobile. And then the vessel will be in Mobile being prepped for the sinking. You have got to cut holes in it so the ship will sink on an even keel. You don't want it rolling on its side or worse, capsizing. So they're going to do a lot to prep her for her eventual scuttling off the coast. I'm going to, like I said, do a whole video on her because her creation is really amazing. If you want to read about SS United States, I have 2 recommendations for you. First recommendation here is Steve Uchafusa's A Man and His Ship. This is about William Francis Gibbs. It is a great read. The first half of the book is about Gibbs. Gibbs is very much like a Bill Gates, Elon Musk type character, very much outside the mainstream. But then the second half is all about SS United States. The other book is one by Frank Brainerd, which is The Big Ship, the story of the SS United States. If you want the wonky, if you want the tech, if you want all the kind of details about horsepower and everything about the ship, this is the book you want. But SS United States makes me sad. It really does. It's sad. 4 of her propellers are scattered around the United States at different places. One is at my alma mater. The other one is across the river at the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy. One's at the Mariners Museum in Newport News, Virginia. And the other is at Hudson River Park at Pier 76. So absolutely amazing ship. I'm trying to do a video with Ryan over at the Battleship New Jersey and talk about it, because there's a connection between SS United States, the Iowa-class battleships, and actually the construction of the aborted first supercarrier, the USS United States. So we're trying to work on coordinating that. I think it'll be a lot of fun to watch. All right, let's go ahead to our 4th story. Story number 4 takes us out into the English Channel and deals with a shipping company that has a long track record with what's going on with shipping, and that is Grimaldi Lines. Back in July of 2023, we covered extensively the fire that took place on board the Grand Costa d'Avorio. This was a roll-on, roll-off container vessel in the port of Newark. They were loading used and basically junk totaled cars on board for shipment to Africa, when one of the vehicles being used to push vehicles into the vessel caught fire. Newark Fire Department responded and 2 Newark firefighters died. This hit me in 2 different levels. Obviously, being a seafarer and shipping, obviously, number 1, that's me. But number 2, I've been a volunteer firefighter for 25 years. And that was a very emotional story for me. I talked to a lot of firefighters after the event about what to do in case of shipboard fires. This time we have another fire involving Grimaldi Lines. The Grande Brazil caught fire on Tuesday, February 18th. 28 of the crew have been evacuated from the burning roll-on, roll-off vessel. This image shows smoke emanating from the after superstructure. Grimaldi ships are very unique in their kind of structure. The after and lower part of the vessel is roll-on, roll-off facilities where you use this stern ramp, starboard quarter ramp to load the vessel. These are all decks in here for loading vehicles. But the forward part is containers along with its own cranes to self-load, and then some container facilities or roll-on, roll-off below deck. So the vessel was about 15 miles off Ramsgate when it issued its initial mayday call at 9:35 a.m. on Tuesday morning after discovering the fire on one of the decks. The onboard fire suppression systems initially brought the situation under control. However, a second report of a fire was made at about 4:25, and that prompted a renewed response effort that evening. By 10 p.m., the crew evacuated onto Grand Brazil's lifeboat about 12 nautical miles off Ramsgate, where they were picked up by a tug assisting with the operation. A British Coast Guard spokesman confirmed that a coordinated response, including a Coast Guard helicopter and fixed-wing aircraft, a Belgian Coast Guard helicopter, and a Royal National Lifeboat Institution all-weather lifeboat from Dover and Ramsgate responded. The crew were transferred from the tug onto the Ramsgate lifeboat and taken to Ramsgate, where they were met by the Southeast Coast Ambulance Service. By Tuesday evening, salvage operations were underway with the tug Multitrag 35 establishing a towing connection to the burning vessels. Additional support vessels arrived in the area. Now, this all follows on fires reported on Grimaldi ships really since about 2019. In March of 2019, Grimaldi Lines, roll-on, roll-off container ship Grand America, caught fire and sank in the Bay of Biscay. 2 months later, in May, the Grand Europa caught fire off the coast of Mallorca in Spain, and then in June of 2023, the Grand Costa d'Avorio had its fire in Port Newark. Grande Brazil is a Malta-flagged vessel built 25 years ago, about 56,000 tons, about 213 meters in length, so about 650 feet. One of the great things about my channel is the support I get from my viewers. So Jack Russell sent me this. This is the VHF transmission between the vessel and the Coast Guard in England.
Coast Guard's gone to Brazil.
Mayday, Grande, Brazil. This is Dover Coast Guard. Question, has the fire been extinguished? Over.
Dover Coast Guard, Grande, Brazil. That's correct. Fire has been extinguished, but there is a lot of smoke, so we will continue to cool down all the cars which were burned to be sure that there is no secondary fire in the area. And after another 2 hours, I will ventilate the area and get the power back to investigate more deeply. Over.
So that audio was from the initial fire that was reported on board the vessel. This image shows you a flare, a infrared view of the vessel, and you can see where that fire is located in those decks back aft. This is the after part of the vessel right here, bow up here. You can see containers up on deck, and you can see the heat emanating from those decks at the time. The second kind of reflash is a common occurrence. You have to be very careful with fires. The key thing here would have been to seal the compartment off and not open it back up to oxygen. That is the key. I'm not exactly sure why they would go in and open it up. The idea is you seal the compartment, cut off air, flood it with CO2. You use carbon dioxide typically to snuff out the air, and then you leave the compartment sealed, take the ship into port so that you will have more assistance pier side, so that when you open up the compartments, you prevent a reflash. It's a lot different than fighting fires on land. Grimaldi just has this kind of trend here with their ships bursting into flames. They carry a lot of crap cars, and I don't think it's an EV fire. The ship was heading from Antwerp over to Le Havre in France. And the vessel tends to operate along the west coast of Africa, so very much like Grand Costa d'Avorio, I'd imagine it's taking a lot of kind of junk cars and cars that can no longer operate within the EU. It was the same thing with Grand Costa d'Avorio. They were cars that no longer could operate in the US and take them down to Africa. Transportation of old, damaged cars is really dangerous. All right, let's go ahead and jump to our next story. Story number 5 involves another fire, this time on board a U.S. tug on the Delaware River. This was actually just downriver for where the SS United States was being towed. This story over in Workboat, tug catches fire on the Delaware River. Story is fire broke out on a tugboat on the Delaware River on Tuesday, prompting a response. At 9:26 a.m., watchstanders from Coast Guard Sector Delaware Bay received a distress call on VHF Channel 16 from the crew of the 71-foot Thor, stating the vessel was on fire near Pea Patch Island. Sector Delaware Bay watchstanders issued an urgent marine information broadcast notice to mariners and dispatched Coast Guard crews to the area. Coast Guard Sector Delaware Bay launched crews from Station Philadelphia and an MH-65 Dolphin helicopter from Air Station Atlantic City. Local partner agencies including Wilmington Fire Department and Goodwill Fire Company in Newcastle, Delaware, deployed assets in response. All 4 crew members were safely evacuated from the vessel by Good Samaritans. Photos shared by the Coast Guard show the Vane brothers tug Y River assisting response efforts. The fire was extinguished and the vessel was taken under tow, according to local reports. Local media reported the blaze began in the tug's engine room, but the Coast Guard said it is still investigating the cause. The ship was built back in 1972 by Maine Iron Works in Houma, Louisiana, is owned by the Albemarle Tug Company based in Maycock, North Carolina. This image shows Wilmington Fire Department's Fireboat 7 deployed to the scene of the fire on February 18th with crews from the department's Engine 1 and Engine 3 and the Goodwill Fire Company in Newcastle responding. You gotta love those fireboats. They play such a big role. They need to be everywhere up and down the rivers and harbors of the United States. You've heard me say that a lot about fireboats. They are so essential for getting firefighters, equipment, water on scene quickly to help restore this. And again, it's part of the common occurrence. I mean, boat fires will happen, and fortunately, we did not have a loss, but fires are a ever-present danger at sea, whether it's in the English Channel or right there in the Delaware River. All right, let's go and supersize and head over to story number 6. Story number 6 takes us over to Souda Bay, Greece, where we're following the story of the USS Harry S. Truman. Did 2 videos on this, and matter of fact, did a guest appearance over on Ward Carroll's show the other day. talking about this. You may remember that the Truman was involved in a collision just north of Port Said as the ship was preparing to enter the Suez Canal, got into a collision with a bulker coming out of the canal heading to Romania, and the ship has since returned back to Souda Bay for a repair assessment. We do have some images of the vessel. These are the latest image that we have of the vessel at Souda Bay. You will notice that the ship has suffered a hull breach right back here on the starboard quarter. This is right above the mooring deck. So you do have a breach of the hull. It's way above the waterline. However, it is a major issue. You also have that incinerator pipe there that has been ripped apart. You can see the incinerator streak where the exhaust goes up the side of the vessel, but that has been damaged along with the sponson here. However, elevator 3, a question we had early in the videos was whether or not the elevator was damaged. Elevator 3 is down in its lowered position at this point. Story by Sam Legrone over at USNI News. Harry S. Truman pulls into Souda Bay for collision repairs. So a key point here is the Navy's Forward Deployed Regional Maintenance Center will assess the repairs needed to the Truman. The assessment team includes structural engineers, naval arcs, and other personnel from the Forward Deployed Regional Maintenance Center and the Norfolk Naval Shipyard. Goes on, they will be supported by the ship's force personnel and local industry partners for the repair effort. This is the webpage for the FDRMC. You got to love the Navy and their acronyms. But this was set up as part of an effort to deal with intermediate, emergent, and depot level maintenance in forward areas, particularly in the 5th Fleet, which is the Persian Gulf region, and the 6th Fleet through fleet technical assistance, voyage repair, and contract maintenance oversight. So this entity was really designed to provide that, initial level of protection and repair when needed. I've raised the issue here that the case of the Truman, and I talked about it on Ward's channel quite a bit, and I'll have a link to that in the show notes, is that this is a good chance for the United States to test its ability to repair a aircraft carrier forward deployed. Can the ship continue on? Yeah, the ship's captain, Snowden, had flight operations going on as the ship sailed from Port Said up to Souda Bay, so they were landing and taking off aircraft, so they are mission capable. The question is the damage the ship sustained. You don't want to sail around with holes in the side of your ship. That's just going to get bigger and bigger due to vibrations, and especially on the stern where you're landing aircraft. Plus, we don't know interiorly in the interior of the ship whether or not frames were damaged, how severe this is. Now, Truman is scheduled to go in for its major refueling. It was actually delayed because of the delay of the current carrier that's in there right now. A lot of that happened due to COVID. So Truman was supposed to be going under its midlife, basically refueling. It got pushed off, so Truman took a deployment to the Mediterranean. When it goes back, it's scheduled to go in. So any repair right now is going to be really just enough to get it through its current deployment and get it back to the United States. But again, much like I talked about when the Bighorn grounded the oiler that was supporting the Lincoln battle group, this is a good test for the U.S. Navy to determine whether or not it has the capability to keep a aircraft carrier, in this case, forward deployed when it takes damage. Granted, this damage is not severe. It's not as severe as we could potentially see in a peer-on-peer conflict with missile hits and drone hits or something along those lines. But definitely a great measure to determine whether or not the ship is capable of sustaining. Then we have this one last piece of information that just came in from USNI News. The Harry S. Truman commanding officer was removed from command following the collision with the merchant ship. This is the statement. Captain David Snowden was removed from command of Truman on Thursday, according to congressional notification reviewed by USNI News and confirmed by a Navy official. According to the notification, Snowden was removed due to a loss of confidence in his ability to command following the February 12 collision between Truman and the merchant vessel MV Besiktas M off the coast of Egypt. The carrier, which deployed in September, is in port in Souda Bay, Greece for inspection. Snowden is a 96 graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy, a career fighter pilot. Prior to Truman, he was the Truman's executive officer and commanded amphibious warship USS San Antonio. In the statement, following an earlier version of the post, the Navy said the commander of USS Dwight D. Eisenhower, Captain Christopher Chowda Hill, will command Truman in the interim. Hill led Ike during an extended deployment to the Red Sea to support Operation Prosperity Guardian. All right, let's go to story number, that's right, 7. So you may remember I did a story on the Ships for America Act. This was a piece of legislation, bipartisan, across Republican, Democratic lines, and from senators and congressmen from around the country, that were really trying to reform and modernize the American maritime infrastructure and the U.S. merchant marine, including shipbuilding. Well, there are other nations that are very much following that line. This story over at G-Captain talks about this from Reuters. India just set up a $3 billion maritime development fund for the shipping industry. So India will set up a $2.9 billion maritime development fund for the long-term financing of the country's shipbuilding and repair industry. Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman said on Saturday the South Asian nation is spending billions to refurbish its infrastructure in an effort to become a world-class manufacturer. This is under Prime Minister Modi, who aims to bring India into the developed nation status by about 2047. According to plans, the government will contribute 49% of the fund and mobilize the remainder from ports and the private sector. India's shipping fleet has not kept pace with its surge in trade, including imports of energy and exports of refined oil. The government will also promote shipbuilding clusters to increase the range, categories, and capacity of ships. This will include additional infrastructure facilities, skilling, and technology to develop the entire ecosystem. Now, India, when you talk about Indian shipping, it is shipbreaking. That is what India tends to be known. However, India is trying to develop its ports, it's trying to develop its infrastructure, and more importantly, it's really trying to develop into a shipbuilding nation. At the same time, you see this story come out with Maersk and Cochin Shipyard signing a strategic memorandum of understanding to boost India's maritime ambitions. So AP Moller, Maersk, and Cochin Shipyards have signed a strategic memorandum of understanding to strengthen India's position. Partnership comes at a critical juncture as the global shipping industry faces looming capacity constraints in ship repair facilities worldwide. Under the agreement, Maersk will utilize its fleet experience to enhance Cochin Shipyard's limited capabilities with a primary focus on container ship maintenance, repair, and dry docking operations. You may remember the U.S. Navy, along with the Military Sealift Command, recently made an agreement with India to get some of its ships repaired over in India. Maersk, who for a long time used shipyards in Denmark, got rid of them in about the early 2000s, went over to Korea. Almost all Maersk ships are built over in Korea now. However, repair facilities have waned around the world. With most shipbuilding being done in China, Japan, and Korea, we've seen an overall reduction in shipbuilding capacity from about 2007 to the modern time. We've seen a reduction from 700 shipyards down to about 200 shipyards. And more importantly, what we've seen is consolidation of shipyards. 9 large shipping corporations across those 3 countries control about 94% of all ship production in the world. The number of ships that can be built worldwide have reduced from 2,000 a year down to 1,200. And repair facilities are really in the want. And India is really in the market to expand its shipbuilding capability. So much like the United States is in the Ships for America Act, Ships for India Act seems to be full and out there. All right, let's go to story number 8. You may remember back in December, there was a story about China developing nuclear-powered container ships. Well, not to be outdone, Korea is jumping on that bandwagon with plans to build a nuclear-powered container vessel of their own. Here's a story by Mike Schuller over at G-Captain. HD Korea Shipbuilding and Offshore Engineering has reached a significant milestone in maritime innovation with the unveiling of its nuclear-powered container ship design utilizing small modular reactor technology. The groundbreaking design revealed at the new Nuclear for Maritime Houston Summit represents a significant advancement in sustainable shipping technology. The 15,000 TEU, that's 20-foot equivalent unit class container ship, has already received approval in principle from the American Bureau of Shipping. The vessel design eliminates the need for traditional engine exhaust systems and fuel tanks, optimizing space for additional cargo capacity. Safety features include a sophisticated marine radiation shielding system utilizing a double tank method with stainless steel and light water. Supercritical carbon dioxide-based propulsion system is a system that uses heated carbon dioxide to generate power more efficiently at lower temperatures. Quote, nuclear-powered vessels can be a game-changer in the current shipbuilding market where carbon neutrality is emerging, unquote, said Patrick Ryan, Chief Technology Officer of ABS. The economic advantages of nuclear propulsion are compelling, according to ABS Chairman and CEO Christopher Weinernicke. When considering fuel differentials, compliance costs, and residual value, nuclear-powered vessels are cost competitive with fossil fuel alternatives while offering zero carbon operations. So let me be clear a little bit about nuclear-powered vessels. This is a lot different than a nuclear-powered naval vessel. These reactors are much different. They're not producing as high a percentage of power, but more importantly, these are being talked about being put into container ships, large container ships. These are not going to be put in small vessels. Number one, you want them in container ships because you're going to need approval of countries to run these ships. That means these ships would have to be on a fixed liner service. They're going to be the most economical on large vessels, and so you're going to want them to build them in the large, kind of ultra-large to Neo-Panamax style vessels that can go through the Panama Canal, through the Suez Canal, or on the route around Africa. You also want these reactors to be modular, meaning you'll be able to take them out. What you don't want to do is build a ship for 15, 20 years, and then you're stuck with it and you can't scrap it because it's got a nuclear reactor in it. We saw that with the SS Savannah recently up in Baltimore. We've seen this with nuclear reactors in warships. The British have every nuclear submarine they've ever built since Dreadnought sitting up in a lock in Scotland because they can't scrap them. The U.S. is having problems with scrapping the Enterprise, the first nuclear-powered aircraft carrier. They're running behind on scrapping of nuclear submarines up in Bremerton in Washington. So you really want this modular reactor so you can kind of slide in, slide out, take it out, and then you can scrap the vessel, recycle it after 15 to 20 years. However, in terms of compliance for standards, IMO is pushing for zero emissions by 2050, and nuclear power has the potential to provide that. Now, of course, there's a lot of concern about nuclear power and what it entails. There's going to be a big proving cycle with this. However, if countries like Korea, China, and the United States can get approval to put those reactors in ships and run them between set countries, that's going to be a game changer in many ways. I think it's a big opportunity for the United States, who has a really good track record in nuclear reactors, that it can be the provider for it. Yes, it's going to be more expensive. Yes, engineers are going to need more training, but you're not going to be paying fuel costs. You're not going to have to worry about refueling of the reactors. This is a reactor designed to run for a course, and then you recycle it. So it's going to be a major issue. All right, let's go ahead and head over to story, number 9. Story number 9 takes us down to the Gulf Coast of the United States, and this story by Maritime executive: the first U.S. wind turbine installation vessel, Charybdis, for Dominion Energy is nearly complete. Unveils shipyard in Brownsville, Texas, released the first photos of the vessel as it undergoes trials. Charybdis is 96% complete and complies with U.S. Jones Act regulation, allowing it to operating seamlessly in U.S. waters for domestic offshore wind projects. One of the largest wind turbine installation vessels of its kind globally, Charybdis is designed to handle current and next-generation wind turbines up to 12 megawatts or larger. So you will notice that this is a jackup ship. This ship has these huge, massive kind of lattice structures that go into the bottom of the ground there, and the vessel actually lifts itself up. It creates a stable platform. The ship is 472 feet long with a width of 184 feet, draws 38 feet, and is equipped with a 426-foot crane capable of lifting 2,200 tons and can accommodate up to 119 people. Work started in December of 2020, and it was launched in April of 2024. This is in the height of COVID, so a lot of issues. Unveils down in Brownsville, largely built offshore platform, so this is kind of a natural build. The original delivery date was late 2023, but it had fallen back, with the company now saying it remains on schedule for delivery in 2025. This is going to be part of Dominion Energy's Coastal Virginia offshore project. As the first of its kind in the U.S. domestic shipbuilding to meet the requirements of the Jones Act, the cost of the vessel has skyrocketed. Original estimates placed the vessel cost between $500 million, but the company later adjusted it to $625 million. But now we're seeing costs of maybe up to $715 million. Despite the cost increase for the vessel and the project, Dominion Energy continues to espouse the value of offshore wind and the construction it will make to operations. The company says the overall project for offshore wind remains on budget, although it recently increased costs related to transmission lines. It said the installation was past the 50% mark offshore and on schedule. So obviously critics of the Jones Act are going to jump on this and talk about the fact that this vessel jumped from 500 to 715 million, and you can build vessels like this overseas for a lot less. True. And the question is, how much is being subsidized by those ships offshore? Also, the number of wind installation vessels is finite. There's not that many. Because this ship is Jones Act, it's going to be 100% dedicated to operating in and around the United States. We need to reform the Jones Act. I can't say this enough. Repealing the Jones Act does not fix anything. It doesn't. Plus, it has unintended consequences because the Jones Act does much more than just coastal shipping. But what we need to do is enact reform so that we can help offset the cost of building ships like Charybdis in the United States. We need to be building vessels that can operate in the coastal waters of the U.S. We need to build new ferries. We need to build new tugs and barges. We need to build a whole variety of ships. And we shouldn't be relying on foreign shipyards to be building all those, because again, the largest shipbuilder in the world and growing is China. China is the one that's driving shipbuilding. And when you compare building vessels like this to places overseas, you have to understand that those costs are being driven down by China. So what's happening is governments are either providing direct subsidies or indirect subsidies to lower the cost. That is the number that's being driven, and we need to get on board. India realizes it. When are we going to wake up and realize we need to do the same thing? All right, let's go to our last and number 10 story of this mega expanded version of What the Ship. For our last story, we head over to Lloyd's list with a story outside their paywall, but I think very important to look at. It's This Week in Charts. They're talking about Trump's massive reciprocal tariffs. They're talking about the trauma of the livestock carrier fleet, something we don't talk about enough, but we really need to, and the Russia-Ukraine peace prospect, which is putting pressure on tanker sentiment. So let's take a look at spot rates according to Lloyd's. They're looking at a couple of different indices here. They're looking at the Shanghai Index, they're looking at Drewry's, and they're looking at Xentia's here. And they're looking at 4 specific routes out of Shanghai, one from Shanghai to the West Coast, the East Coast, Northern Europe, and the Mediterranean. And they go back to February of 2024. That is shortly after the Houthi initial attacks, which started in December of 2023. We saw a spike. If you go back earlier than this, rates would be down below anything you see right here. It would be down in the 1 and 2,000s. But then we had a spike early on, then we had a drop, and then we had the long-term impact around the summer of 2024 where everything was hitting and we saw really high spot rates come in. Then everything began to fall again at the end of the year, and then another climb, and now we're falling again. And if you look at Drewry's and if you look at Xentia's, it all follows kind of the same pattern. These are spot rates. These are things you're booking at the very last minute. And the question becomes, all right, what is this telling us? Well, long-term rates are much lower. If you can book ahead of time, which is going to be happening, for example, at the TPM conference, the Trans-Pacific Maritime Conference in early March out in Long Beach, a lot of shippers are going to be booking. However, what we're seeing is a lot of volatility in the container market. Now, this is good for the container carriers. I've said it before, I say it again. Their favorite people in the world are the Houthi. They won't admit it, but the Houthi gave them a big uptick when everything looked pretty bad for them, economically speaking. And so this rate movement is definitely helping them out quite a bit. The question is, if we see a return to normalcy in the Red Sea, if the Israel-Gaza-Hamas peace treaty or peace negotiations come to fruition and the Houthi open up trade through the Red Sea, then that can see a restoration. The problem is, who's going to be the first to go through the Red Sea? This is the big question. Who's going to go through and who's going to finance it? Because not only are the container companies and the ocean carriers in general making some great profits because of these diversions, so have the insurance companies. And the question becomes, who's the first one to go through? The next chart here deals with port state controlled detentions of livestock carriers since 2019. And they're talking about regions or MOUs. So you can see where livestock carriers are being detained. Now, the number is going down, but so is the number of livestock carriers being used around the world. However, what we saw was after 2022, kind of an uptick coming in. Now, livestock carriers are very controversial in shipping. I will tell you this. I'm not a big fan of them. I don't like them because they're really hard on the livestock. Putting livestock on vessels, sailing them over long distances, you have a death rate on the ships. You do. It's just natural. Now, you have a death rate with livestock in general. I mean, that happens all the time. Livestock movement has improved over the years, but not all the time. There are some bad operators out there at times. Now, I'm not saying they're all bad. There are some good operators out there that do move livestock around the world. But one of the things that we are seeing here is that issues in the number of vessels being inspected and detained is going down, meaning that hopefully the overall use of the vessels is improving. However, it is still a very dicey trade. Most of the carriers are owned by small kind of family-owned companies, so they take it very personally when you talk about this. There are some good operators out there, but again, one of the things we're seeing is a lot of livestock being moved by other means, by aircraft or by slaughterhouse, and moving them by freezing them. However, you do need to move livestock around the planet. And so you're going to need them out there. There are obviously groups that watch this very closely. The next chart that's used here is looking the Baltic exchange at product tankers. So again, we're looking here over the past year of the charter of long-range and medium-range tankers. These are product tankers. These are gasoline, diesel, kind of refined petroleum vessels. And you can see the charter rate per day and how it's kind of dropped over the course of the year since February of 2024. Big spikes there early in 2024, but then it's really kind of fallen off. And if you look at the year to date, same thing, we're definitely seeing the drop there. Now, a lot of reasons for that happening. Obviously, the opening up of the Red Sea is one of those areas. A realignment of where cargo is going around the planet. The intervention by Russia into the selling of a lot of cargo here is also very important in the shipment going on. All of that is really playing a big role. So what's going to be interesting to watch coming up here is how the Trump administration deals with Iran. If Iran sanctions are increased, what happens with OPEC productions? And if we get a peace treaty out of Russia and Ukraine, what happens when price caps come off from the G7 and the EU against Russian oil and refined products? That's going to upset everything. And I have to tell you, it's going to be a mad scramble to figure out what's going to happen here. The last chart that we have here deals with Cape-size vessels. These are vessels capable of largely just going around the Cape of Good Hope, but these are showing voyages of bauxite shipments, and you will notice the number jumping here for 2025. There is a massive amount of bauxite being hauled out of West Africa, heading over to China. Now, usually in the first quarter, we see downward trends because of Chinese Lunar New Year. But now what we're seeing is a big jump in bauxite shipments here in January and February for 2025, much higher than we've seen in previous years. So again, this is that demand that China has for raw materials. A lot of it coming out of West Africa, coming around the Cape of Good Hope, rounding Africa and heading toward China. This is why they're seeing Cape-size vessels being used in this. So 10 stories across the board. Man, there is a lot of ship going on around the world. Again, these stories kind of ran the gambit for you today. We've got some big picture stories, got some very, micro stories, tug fire on the Delaware River, just a lot going on. And, I can't help but really kind of push everyone to really be cognizant of what is happening on the seas right now, because it's having a lot of impact in both geopolitical, economic, and even social issues in the planet right now. I've been doing this channel now for almost 4 years. March will be the 4th year anniversary of the show, we have grown tremendously, over 400,000 subscribers. It's been amazing. 200,000 just this past year. So yes, a lot of issues and incidences help propel the channel, but at the same time, one of the things that the bedrock of this channel is to provide you context about global shipping, and that's why What the Ship is such an important feature of the show. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. It was a big episode. It took a lot to put this episode together, so I hope everybody appreciates this episode. A lot of stories in here, maybe too many stories, but every one of those stories I loved. I loved a little aspect of every one of those stories really got my attention. And it was a busy week last week with the Truman and the MSC Baltic going ashore. So covering a lot of stories on that end. But at the same time, again, go back to our roots here. Talk about global shipping and the impact it has. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. Hey, and if you have subscribed to the channel, go back and check again, because YouTube has this weird thing about unsubscribing people. I don't know why they do it, but they do. So if you've subscribed, just make sure you're still subscribed. Hit that bell so you'll be alerted about new videos when they come out. Give it a big thumbs up on the thing. Hit the like button. I appreciate that. That helps with the algorithm. Leave a comment. Just, hey, if you just want to leave a comment, please do. Always like that. I usually will put a pinned statement here, so if you have questions and answers from this week's What the Ship, please put your question there, and I'll try to answer it. A lot of comments come in. I try to do the best I can, but more importantly, if you can, support the page. How do you do that? Well, you can share this across social media. Remember, we're posting videos to Spotify now. I'm on X. I'm on Bluesky. I'm on Facebook. I'm on almost every social media there is. So try to follow us if you can. And if you want to support the page, two good ways you can do it. Number one, hit that super thanks button down below where you can contribute directly to the page, or head on over to Patreon and become a monthly or yearly subscriber to the channel. I appreciate all the support I get from everybody, from my subscribers, from my Patreons, from my super thanks people, and from just people who watch the video. I appreciate that. It means a great deal to me. Until our next episode, this is Sal signing off. I'm at exactly an hour here. I got to go back and edit the video, but I knew this was going to be a long video. But hopefully I'll weed it down from the hour. There's a lot of edits in here I have to go back and do. A few curses too, because I make a lot of mistakes, and I tend to get salty when I make commercials. Maybe I should save some of those for an outtake one day. Until the next episode, this is Sal signing off.